The World Day for Safety and Health at Work is an annual international campaign to promote safe, healthy, and decent work. It is celebrated every year on the 28th of April, coincidentally National Heroes Day here in Barbados, and it has been observed by the International Labour Organization since 2003. This year, the theme focuses around exploring the impact of the climate crisis on occupational safety and health. My name is Natalie Harrigan. I'm an occupational health and safety practitioner, and I have with me here today Mr. Errol Goodrich, Safety and Health Officer in the Safety and Health section of the Labour Department in the Ministry of Labour, Social Security and Third Sector. Welcome, Errol.
Thank you so much for having me here, Natalie. Thank you.
So before we jump right into the main topic, could you give an overview of what the Safety and Health section does, the mandate, the role?
Well, certainly, Natalie. The Safety and Health section is a unit within the Labour Department, within the Ministry of Labour, Social Security and Third Sector. And we are mandated or have the responsibility for ensuring compliance with safety and health legislation. That is the Safety and Health at Work Act, which was proclaimed in 2013 and recently passed safety and health regulations, which gives support to the Safety and Health at Work Act. And the way we do that is that we do routine unannounced inspections on workplaces within Barbados. We also investigate complaints, we investigate accidents, we engage in advisory services to both employers and employees, and we are like what we're doing now, we engage in public awareness events so as to sensitize the general public to important safety and health matters.
As the climate crisis intensifies, workers across the globe find themselves at increased risk to hazards such as excessive heat, ultraviolet radiation, air pollution, vector-borne diseases, agrochemicals. But Errol, let's start with something closer to home, the excessive heat.
Yes, Natalie, and of course you know it has been real hot here in Barbados. And we have been having high temperatures for the last couple of months or so.
And even you expect there to be a couple of cooler months, December, January, February. If we're lucky now, we get one cool month and then we're right back into the heat.
Yes, it doesn't seem as though Barbados has cooled down since last summer, to be honest.
I felt a little cool in December, early January, but then that was it.
Yeah, just a slight cooling, but not the normal cooling that we would expect. Now that has implication for workers. It is a worldwide trend which scientists have shown that there's increasing temperatures worldwide. And workers who work on the outside, in the construction sector, in the agricultural sector, for example, they would be exposed to higher temperatures, which would make them more prone to issues like heat exhaustion, heat strain, and heat stroke even.
And even workers who are working indoors, if they're poorly ventilated areas, the excessive heat would be an issue for them as well.
For sure. And if in those indoor environments there are also machinery that generate heat, then that in itself exasperates or increases this situation, because now the employer has to address the heat generated not only within his business, but the heat that comes from the external environment as well.
And add to that, if you're doing heavy work, it's very labor intensive, and also if you're required to wear PPE to protect yourself, those extra layers are going to cause the person's internal body temperature to increase more rapidly. And if your internal body temperature increases faster than you're able to release the heat, that's when heat stress is an issue. And if it's humid and you're sweating, you don't have the air to cool the sweat for you to then release the heat.
And that is so true, Natalie. Heavily demanding work, working around equipment that generates heat, that in itself would pose challenges to your body adaptive mechanism to cope. But now when you add in the external heat from that's resulting from the climate crisis, then that has an additional level. So what that means now is that employers will have to rethink their risk assessment strategies. And also that will also mean that they will have to have higher level of consultation with workers. You remember that we spoke about, the Safety and Health at Work Act, which requires employers to consult with their workers. If it's more than 25 employees, then that's in the Safety and Health Committee. But if it's less than 25 and it's not practical to have a Safety and Health Committee, they're required to have safety delegate. They have to have that discussion with the worker. And that is important because then that is the way how they're better able to redesign the job. Could you, for example, work at cooler periods of the day? When there are tasks that are heavily demanding, could you do those at cooler parts of the day? And if not, how do you introduce things like breaks? Do you need to have more hydrating drinks so that persons can cool themselves when they need to? And what about the provision of shaded areas so that people can when they take a break, can go into the shade and avoid the impact of the excessive heat that's coming from the environment? And of course, the need to look at AC systems too, because that would be, you will have to look and see how you would have to improve them to also adapt to the increased heat load that they would have to deal with.
And also first aid is important, being able to identify the signs of heat stress. So if a person becomes confused, they're making more mistakes, inability to concentrate, fatigue, heat rash, all of these are things that we need to be able to know to identify when you're at risk and make changes. And when you were talking about consultation, that's always a very important thing to bring up. Because when we put our heads together, that's when we come up with the solutions that will actually work. You can't have just the employers talking about it, can't have just the employees talking about it. You have to work together. And like you mentioned before, there's also advice that you can get from outside of the organization, such as going to the Labor Department even.
Yes, for sure. And we are happy to provide such advice as necessary. There are also recognized sites on the internet. We think about the Health and Safety Executive, the ILO, in response to this climate crisis, have also issued information on their website. So there are a few resources that are there and available for employers to use, so that they can get information as how they can adapt their workplaces to cope with what is happening.
Right, so we have explored the heat. I don't think we needed to convince anyone that the heat is a major issue, but we've seen now in this discussion how it's really a threat multiplier. So the climate crisis does increase the hazards for workers. Let's look now at solar UV radiation. I know here in the Caribbean, we tend to think about it a bit less because most of us are darker skinned. So we're thinking it doesn't impact us so much. But we do know that the solar UV radiation can be damaging to the eyes. We do have a high rate of cataracts here in the Caribbean because of where we're located so close to the equator. We get much more direct sun versus those who are on the curve of the equator, where there's more diffuse light. So with the ozone layer thinning, more sunlight is reaching the earth, and that of course increases the hazard to outdoor workers. Let's explore that a bit more.
Definitely. As you said, solar irradiance has been increasing in the sense that persons are likely to be exposed to more UV rays as a result of the thinning of the ozone layer. And that's why the recommendation is that at the times of the day when solar irradiance is highest, if it is practical, you should always try to adjust the work so that workers are not exposed to that. But if it's not practical, the same type of measures that we put in place to avoid heat exhaustion, you can put in place, having breaks, having sheltered areas, having self-paced work. I have to say though, we all do need a little sun, because a little bit of sun helps us with regard to the production of vitamin D and help with our immunity. It is excessive amounts of it that we don't want, and that the employer can put in place through consultation with his workers to get those policies in place in his or her workplace.
You're talking about consultation with workers, and it drew to my attention. There isn't really the understanding that employers have the duty to protect workers, even if the workers don't want to protect themselves. So employers have to come in kind of like a counselor role to educate, encourage, and even demand that they use the measures that have been put in place to protect them. And even PPE helps with the sun, wearing hats, wearing shirts, long sleeve shirts that cover your skin.
Yes.
You can use also sunblock. These things are important, because another thing that excessive UV radiation can do, it can weaken your whole body's immune system. So that's not something that's thought about very often.
Yes, and those suggestions that you have made is something that we will also support. With regard to safety consultation and that need for employers to work with their employees, that is important, because you need to also, under the safety and health at work, to have adequate supervision, adequate information. Workers have to be informed of the hazards that they face and have to be instructed as to what they can do. Why the employer also has to tell the workers, and we're doing it within the context of consultation, why it is that these measures that we are putting in place, why they are important for you to follow them. And if there's any need for any tweaking of those, what you can do to, that input from the workers can help in tweaking such policies so that they are even more effective.
Absolutely right. So we've looked at the excessive heat, we've looked at the solar radiation. Let's move on now to extreme weather events. Something that we are definitely conscious of is that we are in an area where we're at risk to hurricanes, storms, flooding, and these can have an impact on workplace operations and hence an impact on the workers. So let's dive into that one.
Yes, we have to be mindful of is the fact that we do live in the hurricane belt, and hence at certain times of the time periods of the year we can experience things like tropical storms, tropical depressions, and even the worst case scenario, hurricanes. One of the things that employers will have to do is have both shutdown and opening back procedures. It is that you hear on the radio a Met office giving a warning, or you attune yourself to that. But you should have policies in place. What should I do with that? Who has responsibilities for shutting down the business? How do I shut down the business in a way that allows it to resume as quickly as possible afterwards? And then once the notice has been given, the national all clear has been given, how do I open back the business in such a way that is safe for the workers? All those are procedures that would have to be put in place. For small organizations, that is where where you have that consultation with the workers, whereby everyone knows what their role is in this policy.
Yeah, so hurricane preparedness, as we know, as it has been beaten into us, you need to prepare early for these things. And it comes to mind in realizing the risks and the hazards. It's helpful to businesses, to employers, to be able to plan and to budget for these things, because you don't want these critical safety issues to come up, and then you have to make that choice between safety and productivity. So planning is very important.
Certainly, yes.
So we can move on now to air pollution. With changing weather patterns, there's increased dryness. We know that the Sahara dust is an issue for us here. And also fires, wildfires would occur, and there's more ash, there's more dust in the atmosphere. Again, outdoor workers can be disproportionately affected, but those inside the indoor environment can also be impacted if our systems are not designed properly, because you don't want a situation where there isn't proper filtration, there isn't proper circulation, and then you end up with concentrations inside that are actually higher than those on the outdoors. And I'm sure that from your work at the Labor Department, you know that that is something that is possible.
Yes. As you know, as it gets drier, you have the two issues as you mentioned, dust. You can have the increase of fire, and fire leads to smoke, and this ingress of smoke within an enclosed environment will cause a deterioration of the indoor air quality. So it's things like this that the employer has to be, and the occupier of that space has to be mindful of. And I keep on mentioning it over and over again because it's critical. That is why you have to have policies in place how to treat to that. Very often, if it is a serious situation with the wildfire thing, the relevant authorities will do an evacuation of the area.
But you shouldn't even have to wait on the authorities to identify that.
Yes.
If you're being proactive, you'll be able to evacuate your staff.
Yes.
Make sure you have measures in place for the work to continue outside of the location if possible.
Yes, definitely. I was getting to that. But just to mention that would occur. But like you said, within your system and you're doing your risk assessment and you have those systems in place, you'll be able to identify quite earlier on when a situation is affecting your staff and take the necessary action to protect their safety. Now, in terms of the dust levels and so forth, that is where you will have to have that conversation with your AC service providers to see how you can adapt your systems in such a way so that you maintain the safe environment within. It might mean that you may have to have a more frequent maintenance schedule for your AC systems. That's what it might mean. So those are some of the things that you will have to have in place.
And I know some business owners might be thinking, oh my gosh, this means I have to spend more money. I need more filters, more frequent servicing. But when you compare that to the cost, when you have employees sick, there's a lack of continuity, so there's less productivity, or you have disgruntled workers who aren't working optimally. It is more beneficial to have your workers in a safe and healthy environment so that they can be productive for the organization.
Yes, certainly.
And the impacts of poor indoor air quality are not always as obvious because one person may be affected one way and someone else affected in another way, and you're not even realizing that it's linked to the poor indoor air quality in the office, and that too can reduce productivity in the working environment. So we're not just keeping people safe, we're also trying to help the businesses to be more productive.
Yes.
All right, so we've looked at a couple of things. Let's move on now to agrochemicals. I know at first thought, how does the climate crisis link to agrochemicals? But there is a link because with the changing weather patterns, the changing climates, the pests have a different life cycle, an expanded life cycle. They are in a wider geographical area, have built up resilience, and that has caused the need for the use of more agrochemicals, which then puts workers at risk.
With the use of agrochemicals, one of the things that the Safety and Health at Work would mandate is that all chemicals that you use in the workplace should have a safety data sheet. Now, what the safety data sheet does is that it outlines all the ways that these chemicals can harm you, but it also says what precautions you can take to protect yourself. So the employer, along with the employee, should look at these safety data sheets and then see how they can institute these precautions within their workplace. And in doing that, you look at not only the person who is doing the spraying, not only the person who is handling the chemicals, but any person who may be in the vicinity. It might mean that you may have to have certain administrative controls which prohibits unauthorized persons in the area when you're doing the mixing or when you're doing the handling of the chemicals. So those are certain things that the employer will have to do. In addition, the provision of adequate and appropriate PPE. And under the PPE regulations, you don't just only give workers PPE, you train them how to use it, why they must use it, how to maintain it in a way that will continue to protect their health and safety.
Excellent points you've made, Errol. And it's important to note that occupational safety and health is not only about the safety of the workers, it's about the safety of anybody who may be impacted by our work. So that's why what you said just now about people in the surrounding areas when you're doing this spraying, taking consideration of them is very important.
Yes, and you will note that what some companies do is that they will spray only at certain times of the day. And that way they minimize the impact on the surroundings.
And having your workers aware of what they're doing, why they're doing it, what they can and cannot do will also help them to make critical decisions on the spot. So if they have the training about the use of agrochemicals and they know to pay attention to wind direction and they know the symptoms that can occur if you are allergic, so they will realize, okay, this skin rash that's coming up, perhaps this is because I have been exposed to the agrochemicals and I need to follow up on it before it becomes a more serious or permanent health concern. So just putting a plug there for training, that is very important. You don't just create your policies and tell some people or just tell them once. There needs to be a training program where the information is consistently reinforced.
Certainly, and complemented and supported by adequate supervision.
Yes, because the employers have a responsibility to their employees to care about them, even if sometimes they don't care about themselves. So it's not a situation where you just provide measures there, and if the employee takes it up or doesn't take it up, that's their business. That's not the case. Employers do have a responsibility to keep the workers safe, and that includes adequate supervision, training, instruction, all of these things which are supported by the legislation in the Safety and Health at Work Act.
Yes.
All right, so one last one before we wrap up, vector-borne diseases. Just like the changing weather patterns have caused the pests to impact agriculture, they're also going to impact human beings. Mosquitoes, for example, carrying dengue fever, chikungunya, these are things that we experience here, and they're being exacerbated by the climate crisis, and outdoor workers are disproportionately impacted.
Yes, definitely. That's an issue that employers will have to look at, and that is why one of the things that they will need to do is in situations like that, they will have to, apart from the Ministry of Labor, they will also need to look at contact with the Ministry of Health. They have a vector disease, a vector-borne unit, which provides assistance with regard to that. And so having that contact with the vector division of the Ministry of Health will enable them to be able to put whatever measures they need to put in place to deal with that situation.
So Errol, I think that we've covered a good range of topics here today, definitely providing some useful advice to both employers and employees in how to be safe, how to promote safe, healthy, and decent work. And thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and expertise. Thank you to the Labor Department for the work that you've done and that I'm sure you will continue to do.
Thank you so much. It was my pleasure to be here.
In commemoration of the World Day for Safety and Health at Work, this has been a production of the Safety and Health section of the Labor Department in the Ministry of Labor, Social Security, and Third Sector. Thank you for watching.